There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. You can lie down for 8 hours, close your eyes, let the darkness take you, and still wake up feeling like something inside you is hollow. Not tired in the body, tired in the self. And the strange thing is, most people who feel this way cannot explain it. They go to work, they smile at the right moments, they say the right things to the right people, and somewhere beneath all of that performance, there is a quiet voice asking whether any of it is actually them, whether the person moving through the day is real or just a very convincing costume worn by someone who forgot what they actually look like. If you have ever felt that way, even once, even briefly, even in the silence between one task and the next, then this video was made for you. Not for the philosopher with a library of Sartre on his shelf, not for the academic who already knows the terminology. For you, the person who suspects, somewhere deep in the chest, that the life being lived right now is not quite the right one, and who has never had the language to explain why. Here is what almost no one tells you. The discomfort you feel is not a malfunction. It is not anxiety in the clinical sense, and it is not ingratitude, and it is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is the sensation of a consciousness becoming aware of its own cage, and the cage was not built by your enemies or by fate or by bad luck. The cage was built by you piece by piece every time you chose comfort over truth, every time you let someone else define who you are, every time you said yes when the whole interior of your being was screaming no. Jean-Paul Sartre had a name for this. He called it bad faith. And the terrifying thing about bad faith is not that it is rare. The terrifying thing is that it is the default setting of almost every human being alive. Most people live their entire lives inside it and never once feel the walls. Sartre believed that human existence is unlike any other kind of existence in the universe. A rock is what it is. A tree is what it is. A hammer has an essence that precedes it, a purpose that was decided before it existed. But a human being, Sartre argued, arrives in the world first. The existence comes before the essence. There is no blueprint. There is no divine plan that explains what you are supposed to be. There is only the terrifying, luminous, completely open fact that you exist, and that everything you are will be the result of the choices you make. This is what he meant by the phrase that became the cornerstone of existentialism. Existence precedes essence. You are not born with a nature. That defines you. You are born with the freedom to define yourself, and that freedom is not a gift. It is a weight. It is a burden so heavy that most people spend their entire lives running from it. Bad faith is the running. It is the elaborate system of self-deception that a consciousness builds in order to avoid facing the vertigo of absolute freedom. When you tell yourself that you had no choice, that is bad faith. When you define yourself entirely by your job title, your relationship status, your nationality, your religion, or any other external category, and then behave as if that definition is fixed and unchallengeable, that is bad faith. When you do what your family expects, not because you genuinely want to, but because disappointing them feels like a kind of death, that is bad faith. Sartre was not moralistic about this. He was not standing on a mountain condemning the weak. He was describing something structural, something almost inevitable, because the alternative to bad faith is the full and naked confrontation with what he called radical freedom, and that confrontation is genuinely terrifying. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing that the only thing stopping you from jumping is you. Just you. No law of nature, no external command, just your own choosing. That sensation is what Sartre called anguish, and it is the first sign that a person is beginning to wake up. The first sign that you have stopped living in bad faith is precisely this. You feel the anguish, not the shallow anxiety of daily inconveniences, the deep structural anguish of realizing that nothing about your life was inevitable, that you chose it, that even the choices you thought were made for you were made by you in the act of not refusing them. Most people never feel this because they never stop moving long enough to let the silence ask the question. But if you have felt it, if there has been a moment where the ordinary scaffolding of your life suddenly seemed arbitrary, where you looked at everything you had built and thought, but why this? Why these choices? Why this particular version of me? Then you have touched something real. You have touched the border between bad faith and what Sartre called authentic existence. The second sign is that you begin to notice when you are performing. There is a famous example Sartre gives in Being and Nothingness. A waiter in a Parisian cafe who moves with too much precision, who carries the tray with just a little too much ceremony, who inhabits the role of waiter with such completeness that he has ceased to be a human being who happens to be working as a waiter and has become, in a sense, waiterness itself. The waiter is not a bad person. He is doing something that every professional, every parent, every partner, every friend does constantly, which is collapsing the distance between the role and the self. And when that distance collapses, the self disappears. When you begin to notice the performance, when you catch yourself mid-sentence and think, wait, is this actually what I think, or is this what someone in my position is supposed to think? That moment of noticing is the second sign. The gap has opened. The gap between the role and the one playing the role. That gap is that freedom becoming visible. Before we go any further into this, there is something I want to ask you directly, and I want you to feel free to answer honestly, even if only in your own mind. Have you ever gone through an extended period of your life where you felt like you were playing a character that was not quite you? Where the days passed and you functioned and you contributed and you were present, but there was something slightly off, like watching a film where the audio is just a fraction of a second behind the image. If that resonates with you even a little, I want you to go to the comments right now and write, I have been living someone else's version of me. Not because it is a dramatic gesture, but because there are people watching this video right now who feel exactly what you feel and who need to see that they are not alone in it. The act of writing that sentence is itself a small act of authenticity. It is a refusal of silence. It is the kind of thing Sartre would have recognized as a moment of genuine self-confrontation, and it matters more than you might think. The third sign is that you stop using determinism as a shield. This is one of the subtler forms of bad faith, and it is especially seductive for intelligent people. It is the habit of explaining your behavior through causes rather than choices. You are this way because of your childhood. You cannot change because of your psychology. The circumstances made it impossible to do otherwise. Sartre was not naive about circumstances. He knew that context shapes everything, but he made a distinction that changes everything once you understand it. The distinction between the situation and the response to the situation. The situation may not be chosen. The response always is. Viktor Frankl came close to the same truth from a different direction. Sartre arrived at it through pure ontology. You are never simply the product of what happened to you. You are always, at every moment, the one who is choosing how to relate to what happened to you. The day you stop hiding behind your history is the day you begin to exist in earnest. The fourth sign is that the approval of others loses its absolute authority. Sartre wrote devastatingly about the look, the regard of the other, the experience of being seen by another consciousness and suddenly becoming an object in their world, fixed, defined, reduced. Hell is other people, he wrote in No Exit, and people have been misunderstanding that line ever since, thinking it is misanthropy, thinking it is cynicism. It is neither. It is a description of what happens when we allow the gaze of others to become the final word on who we are. When you are living in bad faith, you need the approval of others the way a building needs scaffolding, not as decoration but as the only thing holding the structure upright. When you begin to stop living in bad faith, the scaffolding becomes optional. You can still value how others see you, still care about relationships and reputation and connection, but their verdict no longer constitutes your reality. You begin to look at yourself from the inside rather than waiting for the outside to tell you who you are. The fifth sign is that choices become harder, not easier. People sometimes imagine that philosophical enlightenment produces a kind of serenity, a settled clarity about what to do and why. Sartre would find that image almost comically wrong. Authentic existence is not peaceful in the ordinary sense. It is vivid, and vivid things have edges. When you are living in bad faith, choices are made for you by the role, by the expectation, by the convention. You do not really choose because you have already handed the choosing over to something external. When you begin to reclaim the choosing, when you stop outsourcing the decision to the social script, every choice becomes an act of self-creation, and that is exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. If you are someone who lately finds decisions harder than they used to be, not because you are weaker, but because you are no longer willing to let the role decide for you, that difficulty is not a regression. It is a sign of growing. The sixth sign is that you begin to feel responsible in a way that is uncomfortable. Sartre argued for something he called radical responsibility, and it is not the kind of responsibility that comes with guilt or self-punishment. It is something more ontological than that. It is the recognition that because you are free, you are responsible, not just for what you do, but for what you fail to do, not just for your actions, but for the world you help constitute by your choices and your silences. When you are in bad faith, responsibility is distributed outward. The economy did this. Society did this. My parents did this. When you begin to exit bad faith, there is a moment of vertigo where you realize that even your complaint about the world is a choice, that even your passivity is an act, that there is no position outside of choosing from which you can observe without participating. That realization is not comfortable, but it is real. And preferring reality to comfort, even when comfort is available, is itself the beginning of authentic living. The seventh sign is the most difficult to describe and the most important to understand. It is a new relationship with time. Sartre believed that the authentic human being lives in what he called the project, the ongoing structure of choices directed toward a future that is always being created. The person in bad faith lives in what we might call the eternal present of justification, always explaining the current, self by reference to a fixed past, always treating the future as something that happens rather than something that is made. When you begin to stop living in bad faith, time changes. The past becomes something you carry with you rather than something that carries you. The future becomes genuinely open rather than a slightly modified repetition of the present. And the present itself becomes charged with significance, because every moment is a moment in which you are choosing who you are going to be, not who you were told to be, not who the role demands, who you are going to be right now by this particular choosing. This is the thing Sartre understood, that most comfort-oriented philosophies prefer to ignore. Freedom is not a reward for the brave. It is the structure of human existence itself. You cannot opt out of it. You can only pretend to opt out of it, and that pretending is what bad faith is. And here is the most unsettling part of everything that has been said in this video, the part that changes the meaning of all 7 signs in retrospect. Recognizing that you have stopped living in bad faith is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a harder one. Because now, you know, and knowing you are responsible for what you do with the knowing, there is no going back to comfortable ignorance once the light has come on. There is only the choice of what to do in the light. That choice is yours. It has always been yours. The only question Sartre ever really asked, underneath all the philosophy and the terminology and the novels and the plays, was whether you are willing to admit that. If this video reached something in you today, something that was waiting to be touched, please take 2 seconds and press like. Not as a reflex, not as a habit, but because small gesture is how this kind of content finds the people who desperately need it, the ones who have been carrying this weight alone and do not yet know that a philosopher who died in 1980 already saw exactly what they are living. And if you want to keep going down this path, if you want to keep having conversations like this one, about freedom, about authenticity, about the terrifying and magnificent responsibility of being alive, then subscribe to this channel. Every video here is made for the person who suspects that the life they are living is not yet the truest one they could be living. For the person who is tired of performing and ready to start existing, you belong here.